All right, ladies and gentlemen, how y'all doing? Gandhi the Zoe. I'm back in full effect. It's been a while, Look, tell you like it is, like it was. So I've been absent, missing in action, obviously, for a few months. What it is I was completing my master's degree, and congratulations to me. You know what I'm saying? I've done that, with success. I've defended my thesis, and I am now a masterium. So that's why I've been missing. So I didn't really had any time. I didn't have any time to you know, engage with y'all. But I'm back. I apologize, and I trust that y'all didn't forget me. And now we're about to pick up again. So without further ado, today's topic. Well, first of all, before we get into the topic, it's with sadness that I have to say that we will have to change the name of the podcast, Principles Over Profits, because over the time when I was absent, I've noticed, on social media that, and even on, excuse me, there are other podcasts anyway. There's one in Germany where they're using Principles Over Profits. So, we're going to have to rest this title. For now, we'll keep using it until I come up with something, that's more appropriate. But perhaps it's going to be, Gandhi Talks, or Let Us Conversate. Something of the sort. But I'm just letting y'all know. For now, it's going to be Principles Over Profits. But, soon it'll change. So what we're going to talk about briefly today is we're going to discuss the topic of religion. We're not going to do, an in-depth dive. We're going to do a surface, but a thorough, surface, because about the concept or the notion of religion. Why? Because some of the discussions we've had, some of the topics I've tackled in the past, such as identity, race, culture, arts, etc., you'll find that there's these topics, they all relate, right? Because they're about who we are as human beings and how we conceive and see ourselves. And so in the near future, I'm going to be discussing a lot about, ideas that has shaped, if you want to say, the Western world. Even, again, the notion of identity, the notion of culture, etc., that we have in the Western world, it has to do directly with this concept or notion of religion. So I find it important for us to, trying to delineate and trying to have some basic understanding about what is understood as religion as we move forward. Often you hear these sayings, right? If you haven't used them yourselves, you've heard other people say it. Such statements such as, well, religion has been the cause of many wars. Religion has, been a medium or a tool for mass massacres globally, etc. Somebody might ask you upon a statement that you make or upon your ethics, are you religious? So this statement, we take it for granted that we know what they mean. And often when people do say or make a statement about religion or ask you, for example, if you're religious, they have a particular idea in mind. And this is the idea that you adhere to a so-called religious system and or institution, and that you practice particular, if you want to say, rules, and guidelines, right? So this is what they understand as religion, but it's a little bit more complex than that. And this is why I wanted to talk about it today. So briefly put, right, religion is very complex. The people who study this in depth, there's no consensus per se, right? The etymology is religio or maybe religere. I'm not proficient in Latin, but this is a Latin word. Probably some scholars would say that. So, for example, the prefix. So it consists of two words, right? Re and ligere, for example, in religion, or religere, or religio, or ligio. Again, pardon my pronunciation. Like I said, I don't speak Greek or ancient Latin. So prefix re, talk about again, it's like, for example, repent, return, right? These words in English, they consist of a prefix and a root word. For example, re, prefix, and turn, the root word. So religion, same thing. It's the prefix re and religio. So some people will say that the religio or religio, it probably relates to the notion of logos, right? Which sometimes they translate as word, but again, logos is a little bit more complex and ancient Greek thought. For now, let's just use the term discourse, for logos. When you hear or when you see they talk about logos, it's not just speech. It's analysis. It's reflection. It's a little bit more broad than just, speaking, even though, we do have the notion of speech in it. So some scholars believe that the prefix re and the root word religio probably stems from logos. Some others will tell you that religio is from, I think it's relegere, which talks about binding again, right? Re again, and relegere would be binding. Now, I'm not sure what to believe in terms of the etymology or the root definition of the word, but what I'm going to discuss and what I'm trying to talk about is the usage of the word, right? So often this happens in language, right? So words in time and history, right? They have roots, they have definitions, right? But as they're being used in, actual life, the definitions often change, all right? There are certain nuances that arise based on practice. So I guess I'm going to focus more on that. In the contemporary, let me not say modern because you'll see why soon. So in the contemporary world, for example, again, the way that we use the term religion, again, we usually refer to someone or a group of people who have belief in the supernatural. They believe that there are entities, divine entities, right, which they call gods, who rule, if you want to say, the cosmos and have some kind of effect, direct or indirect effect upon the machinations, if you want to say, or the mechanisms of the universe. And as such, institutions are constructed, rules, guidelines are constructed, whereby these people who are deemed to be religious practice, if you want to say, their religiosity. So this is in the sense that we talk about religion in our time, in contemporary time. But this is a fairly new, in world history, as far as the records show, this is before we continue, let's say this also. And usually when we use the term religion, or allude to the notion of religion in the contemporary world, we also make a distinction between religious, if you want to say, practice or religious lifestyle, and so-called secular or regular lifestyle. Going back to where I was prior, and this is new. This is a new concept. This didn't exist in the ancient world. I would say, this understanding, its roots are in modernity. By modernity, I'm talking about a particular era in Western history. This is the modernity, basically, you could say, let's say around the late 17th century, maybe a little bit before that, but we could say the seeds were planted way before that. But in the 17th century and going on into the 18th, like if you would say, like during the age of enlightenment, right? You would say that this is the impetus of modernity. This is when people started to question, if you want to say, reality. Because prior to modernity, some things were taken for granted, right? That modernity questioned them. For example, it's just like, see this, you're going to see why the distinction. So I'm saying in the ancient world, there was no distinction between so-called religious life and secular or regular life, right? That's before modernity. And with modernity, people started questioning the notions of the gods, because the scientific worldview emerged, if you want to say, or started to take branch out, if you want to say, right? Started to develop, in modernity. Like thinkers like Kant and Hobbes, amongst others, right? What happened, right? With modernity also, you had the printing press, the invention of the printing press. People, if you want to say, so education now started to be democratized, because prior to modernity, education was the privilege of few and, mostly the rich, and even a little bit further back as you go into antiquity, education was reserved for the elites. And by elites, we're talking about people who were part of the, royal, if you want to say, family, the aristocracy, and the priesthood, right? It's education and literacy was basically the privilege of these groups of people. With modernity and the invention of the printing press, in the Bible is very important also, and if you want to say the development of modernity, right, in the Western world. The Bible started being printed in different languages, or the language of the people. We can also say that, like I said, the education started to be democratized. People started to learn how to read. And with that, as I said, they began also to question. The philosophers, the thinkers of the beginning of modernity started to question the way we view reality. So you can say with modernity, again, the scientific worldview began to take space. So this is when you start seeing this distinction of religiosity or religious understanding, and if you want to say secular or so-called what people today would say as regular, understanding or conceptualization of reality. So prior to that, no, it was taken for granted that the gods because the way the world was constructed, let's say it this way, like I said, I don't want to go in depth, but I want to give y'all some basics so that as we move forward into certain discussions, especially when it comes to theology, or if you want to say the Bible, it'll make sense, or it can hopefully help you, how do I say this? Give you ground for which you can appreciate, some of the ideas and concepts that emerged from the readings of the Bible and that shaped our world. Okay. So again, in the ancient world, people took for granted that the gods existed. Nobody questioned, really. When I say nobody questioned, I mean, of course, you always had people who question, like humans are humans. We're going to question reality. What I mean by question, it was taken for granted that, the gods are real. Today, we don't necessarily believe that way. When I say we, I'm talking collectively. Obviously, we still have belief. I myself am a believer. I'm a theist. I'm a theist in the sense that I do believe that there is such reality as a divine reality, and there is, in my understanding, a divine entity or divine entities which exists in reality. But this is for another discussion. I'm saying, but you have people on the other end of the spectrum who don't necessarily believe this. So you would say some of them are atheistic, or some of them are agnostics. Agnostics is someone who doesn't necessarily take a position because they're more careful. They'll tell you, I'm not sure that I believe in God. I'm not sure God exists. I'm not sure God doesn't exist, right? So this is more the agnostic, perspective. So agnostics is this, like, as far as humans go, existence go, you're going to find agnostics, atheists, and theists. So, but in general, in antiquity, the worldview wasn't scientific. People didn't necessarily, when I say question, I mean, what I mean by question, I mean people didn't necessarily doubt, the existence of the gods per se. You would have people who were indifferent, right, to this notion of the gods. Some people, you will say they're more atheistic. Oh, we don't believe, but by belief, they don't believe in the gods, but not in the sense that we say it today. By not believing in the God, the atheists of the antiquity, you would say, is more someone who believes there are gods, but they don't pledge allegiance or entrust their faith in these gods or a god, right? For whatever reason, maybe because of suffering, maybe for whatever reason. That's, I would say, generally this is what an atheist would be in the ancient world. In fact, there's another dimension to this, if you want to say, of atheism and the ancient world. So much so, right, that people took for granted that, you know, the divine, if you want to say reality, was real, existed. That, see, for example, when the Romans ruled the world, right? Say in the first century, for example, when first, second centuries and moving on, by the 4th century, you would look, put it like this, right? Under Roman rule, you would say the Christians, for example, the people who were going to become the Christians, right? These people were considered to be atheists, right? By the Romans, right? Because the Romans, if you want to say in a sense, were the majority, or they were the ruling people, or right? And they determined by their rule, by their governance, in a sense, what reality was, right? So the Christians, so the Romans, they demanded that people paid homage or reverence the gods. And the Romans, in a sense, you can say, they were, I don't want to use the term fair. They were, in a sense, inclusive, right? You could worship your God as long as you acknowledge the Roman gods, you acknowledge Caesar also as Lord. Worship your God, right? With the Christians, and to a certain extent the Jews, well, when I say Christians, loosely, because the initial Christians, if you want to call them that, although they weren't Christians yet, but what we categorize as initial Christians, they were also, it was a Jewish sect. So when I say Jews and Christian in that sense, I'm just trying to make a distinction and the way they believe. But in reality, if you want to say as a group, right, as a collective, ethnically, this also is problematic. We'll probably go and discuss this in the near future. This notion of, you know, what is it to be a Jew, for example, in antiquity, more in the 1st century, etc. Right? So anyway, so I'm saying the Jews and the people and the Jews who are going to become or develop this new, if you want to call it, religion, Christianity, to the Romans, to the greater Roman Empire, they were considered to be atheistic because they did not pay homage or reverence the gods, right? Because these people were, in a sense, more monotheistic, right? By that time, they believed that one God. They believed that the God that they believe in was the true and living God, and every other gods are non-real or non-existent, right? So in that sense, since the Romans rule, to the Romans, wow, these people are atheistic. They don't pay homage, or they don't respect, or they don't acknowledge the gods, the reality of the gods. Whereas today, when you say, with Christianity now in Western history having become an official religion and having shaped even the Western world, today is the opposite, right? So Christianity became the dominant, if you want to say, religion or worldview, and people who do not believe or adhere in the Christian notion of God are considered to be atheists in a sense, right? So you see how, also when we talk about definition also, right, how, look, the atheism had one way that it was defined, and in time, in context, the realities of human life changes, and so the way they speak changes also, and the word takes on a different definition. So religion, in a sense, is the same way. And the ancient world, like I said again, mostly you didn't find that word. So I'll give you an example. For example, in the 1st century, I might have to look into my phone because that word, I don't know how to pronounce it. So in the New Testament, for example, specifically, there's a book, it's a letter that is attributed to James, Yaakov. James is believed to be the brother of Jesus, Yeshua's brother, and he became the, if you want to say, the leader of the Jerusalem movement. And there's a letter in the New Testament that is attributed to him. And that letter, chapter 1 of James, and from verse 26, let me look it up real quick, okay? The word is thrēskeíē, okay? That word, thrēskeíē, stems from a Greek word. Let me try to pronounce this here. It's very difficult for me. This is not, I usually work in classical Hebrew, so bear with me, okay? Thrēskeíē comes from, I'm looking for the root word, so I can tell y'all in a minute. It says here, thrēskeíē. So look, put it like this. And 1 James chapter 1, that is chapter 1, verse 26, they use the term thrēskeíē. Here it is. Okay, this is what I was looking for. From a noun, a feminine noun, thrēskeíē. So that word generally, it's used. So when they say, so in some English translation, they'll say, you believe you are religious. So the word religious here would be thrēskeíē, okay, from the root word thrēskeíē. That word so they translate it as religious. So you would say more what it means, okay? And definition, in fact, is so let me say it another way. Let me translate it the way that I understand that word, the definition of that word, right? You think you're a reverent person, or you think you're pious, you believe you are a pious person. This is what it meant by religious here, right? So you see, it's not religio yet. So that word here, probably in the Latin, because I don't have that information in front of me, but having an understanding of Christian history and the development of the Christian texts in the New Testament, I know that the Greek Bible would be translated into Latin, right? So probably that word there, okay, in James chapter 1, verse 26 and 27, thrēskeíē would be translated into religio. But what it means, thrēskeíē, in the Koine Greek, right, the Greek of that time, the first century that is, it's piety, reverence, like fear. Also, it has to do with this emotion of fear, this emotion of reverence that you have towards the divinities, right? The deities, or in this case, the deity Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So it's in that sense that they meant a religion. So it wasn't necessarily an organized, institution, right, as we understand it today. Religion was not that. Religion, or thrēskeíē, the word that they use, it simply meant that someone who is pious, someone who does acts that reverences, that shows that they honor, first of all, they acknowledge the reality of the God or the gods, and in action and speech and duty, they show that they exhibit, if you want to say, this reverence or this fear. Okay, so that would make them pious or religious. See? Whereas today, we use religion in that sense too, but in general, what we mean is someone who believes. When we say, are you religious? Or if we ask the question, are you religious? Or if we say, oh, so-and-so, Gandhi's religious. That means he's someone who believes in the gods, right? So there is some kind of a relation, between, I guess, our usage and definition of the term religion and the initial, if you want to say, usage that I just referenced. And for example, in the New Testament letter or epistle of James, chapter 1, verse 26, there's a relation, but it's not quite the same. We don't quite see it that way, the way that they meant it, because again, in the first century, when they said you were pious, also, it didn't mean that you acted in a way that was necessary. Okay, let me take a deep breath here. Okay, so in a sense, everyone, to some degree, okay, was religious in the sense of thrēskeíē, okay, the original sense that, at least in the text here that we're seeing, okay. In the first century, or even before that, across the globe, as far as we have accounts for, most people were pious, religious, because most people, like I said, acknowledge the existence of the gods, and as such, most people carried themselves in a way whereby they showed respect or fear or reverence to a god or to multiple gods. Whereas, again, moving into contemporary time, right? And with modernity, as I said, from the Enlightenment on, the way that and also in the first century also, there's no distinction. There's no regular life or secular life and pious life. That's what I wanted to say when I say, most people, if not to say the general populace of the ancient world, they were all religious in that sense, right? Whereas in our time, as I said, you do have individuals who do not hold on to these notions, who are atheistic or not agnostics. So you would say those people, the way they live their lives, in a sense, they live, you would say, irreligious lives. They live as we would determine it to, they're regular, as if the believers or the religious person is irregular. That's because, in a sense, there's a shift that happened in the Western world. There's more of an atheistic shift, specifically and most pronounced, right, in the beginning, and let's say in the end of the 19th century, and it bloomed, late 20th century, and today, and this so-called postmodern era that we find ourselves in, we take it so it's more an atheistic world, right? So secularism, stems from, if you want to say, this idea of, from modernity, you get secularism because, again, people started to question this, the veracity of the claim about the gods. And again, with the scientific, the developments and the technological developments that happened in the West, we started to believe less and less, and the reality and power of the gods. So as time moves on, as society is developing, you started to see more and more the separation of, church, if you want to say, or religious life and regular life, right? So in a sense, this is how, the way that we see it today, this is how it happened. Whereas going back, again, from the first century and before, no, there was no such conceptualization. People didn't view themselves as living a secular life as opposed to a religious life, right? They just live. So, and in conclusion, I'll stop there. I would say that, so in a sense, you would say that it's a little bit more complex than what I'm going to say here. Don't take, this is not etched in stone. So I'll say religion, in a simplistically put, you would say in the ancient world, religion, what we understand as religion today, we would say this is the way that the ancients viewed reality. Whereas from modernity on to our time, we no longer hold this view. So that's why we have this we compartmentalize, right? So we'll say, well, we do have people who are religious, and to a certain extent, we'll call them superstitious. Whereas in the first century, someone who was superstitious wasn't necessarily because someone believed in, ghosts and gods, etc. It has a different sense. Because like I told you, in the ancient world, in the first century before, no, they all believed in the gods. Meaning that they all acknowledged the existence of the gods. They in a sense, they all thought metaphysically. So superstition didn't mean what it means to them. What it means to us today, that's not what it meant to them then. So with that being said, I'll conclude and do a quick recapitulation. So religiosity in the ancient world did not necessarily exist as we see it today. In fact, the concept of religion that we have today, we invented that. By we, I'm saying the moderns, right? From modernity, which is the era of a particular era, when the scientific worldview started to take shape, on to now, the so-called postmodern era, we have constructed this notion of religion so that we can describe a certain phenomenon, which happened more or less in the, ancient world, in antiquity. So we came up with this concept, okay? In their time, right, they didn't have the notion of religion as we have it today. So in practice then, if one is going to critique or judge or engage the ancient world, say, for example, people who are engaging religious texts, so-called religious texts like the Bible, the Quran, Bhagavad Gita, etc. This notion, you have to be able to make that distinction. You have to realize that, when you're reading these texts, okay, or when you're engaging with these texts, you have to be able to separate your worldview, your understanding of religion, for example, the way you conceive religion, and how you if you don't know, you need to learn and get to appreciate how the ancients viewed what you call religion. We always have to keep this in mind, that what we mean when we're engaging those texts, right, or those ancient ideas, what we mean by religion is not there. We're imposing that view in there, right? So this is what people in the field that I'm in, right? I studied in theology. I have a background in biblical studies, meaning that, I study, the ancient history of the development of the Hebrew Bible specifically. So in that field, right, this is part of how we engage. So this is part of the scientific method, right? You have to keep a distance between yourself and the object which you're studying. So same for you, the average reader, even the religious people. So this is a course of reading 101, reading religious text 101. The religious people, so there's dimensions of reading, right? Usually religious people that we see, I have to be careful here. So I'm using, right now as I'm talking about religion, I'm using it in the sense that we use it today, okay? To talk about us, the people in the postmodern era in 2025. So someone reading the Bible who is a believer, Catholic, Protestant, whatever, right? Choose a denomination. Usually when they read the Bible, they read it devotionally, right? Whereas I'm saying, okay, you can do that. This is one perspective or one way or one mode, I should say, okay, that you can approach, or one mode of reading that one can read the text in the Bible. I would say complementary and very important, okay, to this mode of reading is what we'll say a critical reading. And reading critically, what I mentioned previously, this is where this is very important. You have to take a step back. You have to realize that those texts were written by people who didn't have the same conceptualization or the same understanding, even doctrine that you have today. Even though you use those texts to justify the doctrines and the dogmas that you believe in today. You must realize that, for example, what you believe about the Trinity, for example, if I'm not picking on Christian, I'm just trying to give vivid and concrete examples, and this is what comes in my head. What you believe about the nature of God, for example. So if you use the prism, not prison, the lens of Trinitarian doctrine, right, to explain the nature of divinity, you must realize that, okay, this is you, okay, through Christian history and Christian tradition that is reading this. Okay? If you read the texts, the people who are, whoever they are, even though some of those texts, they're not necessarily historical. By historical, what I mean, actually, I'll say, but they're not history proper. Okay, so let's take away historical. I didn't mean they were historical. In a sense, they are historical, but some of those texts are not necessarily history, right? So, but the people who wrote them are actually actual people. They are people in history. And these people, I'm trying to convey to you that you must, as you're reading them, you have to keep in mind that, okay, whoever wrote this text doesn't think like me, doesn't see religion as I see it. So what do you do now? And at that instance, if you realize and accept that, now you must try to seek to understand, to know, to acquaint yourself with, as much as possible, that is, with, well, what was the understanding, for example, of say, if we pick James, if it's James that wrote the epistle of James, what was he? What was his understanding? How did he see the world, right? From there, once you get that information, now you come back to the text and you read it with this in mind. So I hope I did justice, as usual, okay? I hope I did justice to briefly, to this topic. Like I say, it's nothing systematic. And in the near future, God willing, I will have experts, okay, in some of these subjects where we'll do deep dives, right? We'll ask the deeper and the more profound questions. But for now, what I wanted to do today as we return to the podcast is, discuss, this notion of religion, to try to bring this to your awareness, to make you aware that, hey, the way that you think about religion today is not necessarily the way that, say, the people in the ancient world, like the people in the Bible, the people who wrote the Bible, the people who, like I said, who wrote the Buddhist texts, the Incas, for example, the way they viewed what you call religion today is not necessarily how they understood it. And with that, I wanted to provoke and challenge you to now, if you're going to engage, okay, with ancient history, well, you need to seek to know what they understood and how they understood it. So this is in that sense that I wanted to tackle this topic of religion, because there are so many false understandings and misconceptions, right? Because we misconceive and misunderstand this notion of religion. Like I said, for example, people making claims that religion is the cause of wars, for example. No, that's a fallacious statement. It's a false idea. Religion cannot do anything. Religion, if you were to say, in the sense that we use it today, well, religion is simply an idea. But ideas are not living on their own. Ideas are embodied by people. So maybe that's what y'all mean when y'all make that statement that religion is the cause at the root of many wars and massacres. But my rebuttal is, it's not necessarily religion, it's people. People come up with ideas to justify, if you want to say, their deeds. So in this case, massacre. In this case, war, right? But in fact, I'll stop there because this is not the topic of discussion. If studying history, wars are not usually caused, if you want to say, by religious ideas. Religious ideas sometimes, so-called religious ideas, I should say, are used as, like I said, justification, propaganda. But the true, if you were to say, most wars, I mean, not to say all of them, the ones that we account for, simply, it's about power, right? So I'll stop there. I'm Gandhi the Zoe. Remember also, I sing, I rap. So I do have music out there. Check it out. My YouTube page, Gandhi. But this is Principles Over Profits podcast. As I say, we're going to change the name. And I'm thankful I'm back. I'm thankful that you're back with me. I'll catch you in the next episode. Peace.